Beth, how are you doing? David, thank you very much for taking the call. Frankie, it's Kia here. Just wanted to chat to you before you go out to the Paralympics. It must be an incredible feeling to be going back again for another Olympics.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's sort of, after a while you get used to it, but the buzz sort of starts ramping up. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting into the village now.
How's the feeling in the team?
The vibes are good, we've got good energy, good focus, and I think we're all ready to go to Paris and get those medals.
I mean, the whole thing to me at the moment feels like a massive fever dream. When I was first selected, we have to go through a lot of trials, and the standards of the people trialling was so high, so actually to have made it into the boat and get officially selected, like, that was a huge achievement for me.
I saw the GB team out there just a few weeks ago, at the beginning of the games. The question they were asking themselves is how they could stay calm and almost sort of state of mind stuff rather than the strict training.
Well, absolutely. One of my teammates, Kaylee, she's only been playing the sport for nearly 2 years now. As the team captain, it's just trying to let them enjoy the experience. I think the most important thing for her is to go in, sort of breathe it all in, sample everything, but you've still got a job to do.
I'd say first and foremost, just go and have fun. I know obviously Tokyo was different given COVID and the circumstances, so...
Oh, that's a really big point, yeah, because Tokyo was great, but it was weird because you didn't have the crowds there. This is the first, for you, experience of the Olympics as it really should be. I hear that alongside all of this, you're also studying physiotherapy. How on earth are you managing to juggle that?
My first couple of years on the team, I did part-time uni so that I could row full-time, which was quite difficult, but I managed to sort of juggle it. But I thought with this year being so important, I'll just defer it so that I don't have to think about any uni work whilst I'm training.
Really best luck, and I'm speaking not just for myself, the whole country is willing you on and behind you.
Oh, thank you so much.
And we'll be glued to the television watching you. So best of luck to you and the whole team.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, bye-bye now. Bye-bye.
That was really cool.